The hardest part of that problem is where to go look. What should I be fixing? And that's where monitoring is really, really powerful, right? Where the metrics become very, very super relevant, because now you got multiple, like hundreds of microservices supporting a particular SaaS application. In a bird's eye view, you can just say, oh, everything else looks good, but this particular service seems to be having a problem, right? Then you can dive in, you can go to the second level of metrics, and you can say, okay, now I'm going to look at more deeper operational metrics and keep going deeper and deeper and deeper until you can really find out what's wrong with it.
So thank you for joining us. So with us today, we have Dr. Ali, and he is currently working as GMST and Internet Monitoring at AWS. And our today topic is monitoring solutions for production applications. We can't really think of anyone better than him. So thanks a lot for coming to our office and actually joining us. So he has a PhD in this domain also, and he has written multiple publications in the software-defined networks. So Ali, thanks a lot for coming to our office and giving your time.
Thank you for having me.
So today, Ali, we will talk more about monitoring solutions for production applications. And so let's just start. So I have an application. I have built it. I've tested it properly. Why monitoring now?
So I think that's a change in philosophy that has happened over the past decade or so with the advent of the cloud. Earlier, when you used to ship software, you'd ship a CD to somebody or something that you download, like an ISO that you'll download. It would run the customer environment and you had no visibility as to what they were doing with that application. And with the change and advent of the cloud and SaaS services, now you actually can see what customers are doing. You can see what they're using, what they're not using, how they're using it, what are the different use cases that are built on top of your service that you're offering as a software as a service. So I think that changes the way we think about applications and monitoring. Earlier, since you were shipping something and it was deployed in somebody's environment, you had to build things that never failed. Build to never break, which means you have to, like the hardware mindset of, you're making sure that it's really, really solid before you ship it somewhere was there. Versus now you could actually ship it and then iterate on top of it. You could be more agile because you know what people are using, what they're not using. And that's where monitoring becomes pretty important, because now you have your application, you can find business insights from what people are using or not using. Secondly, if you have something that is failing a lot, you could actually roll it back and go back and fix those things more reactively as well. So the things that never break paradigm has changed to, things will always break and they'll break catastrophically. So you should basically monitor everything thoroughly so that when they break, you are ahead of the curve rather than reacting to it. So I think the SaaS and the cloud have brought a pretty fundamental change in how we think about shipping software.
Okay. So what are the different categories of matrices used to monitor such applications?
So I would classify metrics in three categories. I mean, there are more, but I would just broadly classify them into three categories. The first and most important one, I think, are operational metrics. Is my service healthy? Are the microservices that comprise my service healthy? Is everything interacting the way it should be? So that will be the first metrics, and they're generally real time. You want to know that second when something breaks. So you want to build operational metrics that way. Operational metrics could be things that you could just sort of figure out by just looking at your application's health or where you deployed the application, or it could be some instrumentation that you put inside of your code that is emitting those metrics. So that'll be the first, and I would say the most important class of metrics that you have. You also have business metrics. Business metrics are the ones that are not necessarily real time, but they help you define if your service is offering the value that you intended it to offer. So just because it's running doesn't mean actually people are able to use it and it's delivering the value that you expect it to. Those metrics don't need to be generally are not real time. Sometimes they can be, but they're not necessarily real time. And you would look at trends and days and weeks to figure out if you're really delivering the value that you are delivering. And the third class of metrics, which are also semi-real time, if not completely real time, are performance metrics. Your service might be healthy and it is delivering the value that you want, but it's loading very slowly. So the load time of your application is very slow. Or it might actually be taking too long to do a TCP handshake with the server on the cloud. Those kind of application metrics now are completely, they used to be part of the operational metrics, but they have now become generally a part of a separate set of metrics called application performance metrics.
Okay, so we have three. I think it's mostly around what's real time, what's not so real time, and some of them, semi-real time, some are the business critical. So let's just talk about some of those operational matrices. Can you give us any good examples?
So operational metric, the simplest one that everybody should be monitoring are CPU, memory, I/O, right? Like how much memory are you using, how much I/O is going through your service, and like just basic metrics that you can guess without any instrumentation in your code. Most clouds just offer it for free. You could actually look at how much you're using, and if that's going beyond a certain threshold, you need to be alerting yourself because something wrong is going on at that point. So that's one, which is just simplest operational metrics that every service must have. But operational metrics go way beyond that. Like operational metrics, you can put instrumentation in your code that every time it crashes or ends up in a unexpected code path, you are emitting a metric. Those things happen hopefully not so frequently in a stable application, but whenever they happen, they're pretty bad in terms of the impact that they can have on your production traffic. So those are done by instrumentation inside of your code. And then operational metrics can also span across multiple different microservices, how they're all connected together. You could have canaries that are also part of your operational metrics that are exercising end-to-end workflows in your applications, similar to how your customers would actually be interacting with your application. So it really depends on how fancy you get. You'll need all of these layers, but they're sort of like, it's like a layered cake. You start off with a very basic one, then instrumentation inside of code, then canaries, and other stuff that comes on top of it.
So are there like different organizational levels who actually monitor different real-time KPIs? Like certain will alert certain people, certain KPIs will alert at certain different?
I would say all metrics, like any organization, the leadership should be willing to page themselves when the metrics are broken. But generally there's like a cascaded sort of like paging workflow on how you alert people, right? So you'll start off with the very basic microservice metrics. If something breaks, your team has an on-call rotation, the on-call engineer jumps on top of it. Generally, how I like to set things up is if the breach in the threshold is too large, then automatically page an escalation rotation. Or if it is not fixed, the metric doesn't go back to steady state for X minutes or so forth, then just automatically page. So that takes the human out of the whole equation, because now you're not saying the on-call engineer thinking, if I wake my manager up in the middle of the night, is it a good thing or a bad thing, right? Like the systems are automatically doing it, so it takes the blame and the worry out of the whole paging ecosystem. But as a leader, you should encourage people to page you when the metrics are not doing good.
Okay, thanks. So this is for operation. So in terms of performance metrics, so any good examples?
So a good example would be page load time. I think you could just do it passively. There's a lot of tools that allow you to do it. Just how long is it taking for me to load a particular web page that I'm offering to my customers? How long is it taking people to fill a form that I have on my website? How long is it from a ride-hailing application? How long does it take from the time somebody starts putting an address in to the time a cab is called, right? So those are all performance metrics that an application can have. There are other more intricate application performance metrics as well. For example, you want to know what's really wrong so that you can zoom into those issues. And TCP handshake times, SSL times, those things are also important in terms.
And these performance metrics are for the engineering teams, I would assume, or is this something which also would go into like somebody who's actually looking after marketing, page loads and all of that? So are these also performance matrices?
I think everybody should care about these. Everybody should care. Maybe the engineering team should care the most, but everybody else should care as well. What generally ends up happening is everybody finds their own top three, right? Like engineers have to care about everything, but marketing picks up their top three, leadership picks up their top three. These are the most important ones for me, and they just zoom into those and they're reviewing them and they get themselves paged on those as well. And those get integrated into their day-to-day work planning, sprint planning, execution, testing workflows.
Okay. So, and then about business matrices. Is it specific to like top management, or is it specific to certain departments? How do you define any good examples of?
Yeah. Business metrics actually. For the longest time, I really want my engineers to care about my business metrics, but it's been a hard-fought battle throughout my career as a software leader. So most of the times, because they're not real time, they're not about service health. Most of the time, the leadership is driving those top down, rather than the other way around. A good example would be, like if you're an e-commerce site, how many orders did you place in a day? If you expect a particular type of volume of rides that need to be called every day. Is it actually happening? I mean, so there'll be good examples of just business metrics of, are you really delivering the value that you intended to? And then you aggregate them over hours, over days and weeks and months to see what the trends are and try to figure out where you should be investing more energy. Other types of business metrics, there's a completely different class of business metric that define where you should be investing engineering effort. So you ship this really brilliant new feature in the market thinking everybody's going to jump on it. These metrics can tell you, actually that never happened. And people are still using some other feature that you didn't think was that important, right? So business metric inform those kind of decisions as well as to new features that have been launched versus workflows, new APIs that have been launched. Are people using it? How frequently are they using it? Are they getting the traction that you want? How are people using those features as well? So these are sort of more owned by the product and leadership teams. But yeah, I would love to build an engineering team that cared as much about the business metrics as they care about their operational ones.
So in terms of monitoring services, you mentioned monitoring services. So how do you set it up? Is it like a service-based approach?
I think no. You got to start off with whatever is easiest for you to get started with, right? Like I said, CPU, memory, I/O. These are things that are just easily available. If you're using an orchestration system or the cloud crashes in your application, or anytime you have a code dump in Linux, you can get metrics for them pretty easily. And those will be the easiest ones, and those are must-haves to you start off over there. But you can't just stop over there because it's just that's table stakes. It's just brass tacks. I'm like, how do you go beyond that, right? To go beyond that, then you need to see how microservices interact with each other. What APIs exist that between these services through which they communicate with each other. You have to test each of those APIs through some, or monitor each of these APIs through some metrics. You also need to monitor the glue that connects. Generally, there's some glue which is not a package in itself, a software package in itself, but something that connects all of these things together to offer the business value that you're trying to offer. To exercise those, you generally build canaries, and you exercise end-to-end workflow similar to how your customer would, but it's a bot rather than a human doing it.
So just to sort of like get deeper into, in terms of like if an application is a monolithic application versus an application which has microservices built into it. So I would assume there's a complexity, lot more complexity with microservices, or am I right?
I would say it's easier to run, it's harder to build, but easier to monitor microservices. Simply because if something breaks in the monolith, it's really hard to find out where to go look. So and then if you want to fix something, the blast radius could be pretty large as well. So the microservice architecture is harder to build, but it's easier to monitor and maintain, because now you know exactly which metrics were impacted, which microservice had a problem. If you change something, it's really going to be contained within that microservice. So it's easier to test the change. It's easier to roll it out worldwide, because every time you're not deploying a monolith which impacts every aspect of your business. So I think it's harder to build, but easier to operate and maintain and monitor.
So in terms of, obviously you need alerting, you need some sort of system that indicates people. What are recommendations over there?
I work for AWS, so I like AWS. So, but yeah, CloudWatch is pretty powerful. I'm like, it's a very powerful system. So I'm like, most people use CloudWatch. It's got a lot of different types of alerting just through EventBridge and other places built into it. You can get email notification. You could get an SNS, SQS type of notification, and then there's all sorts of ticketing system integrations as well as communication system integration that come with it, and on-call tools like PagerDuty and so forth. But I've seen teams, as long as you got the right culture, I've seen teams do a lot with just email notifications as well. From the email notification, somebody gets paged or called. But yeah, PagerDuty is a pretty powerful tool when it comes to actually managing your on-call rotation. So
that is the tool that you recommend to use, right? Coming from AWS.
I love them all. I hate them all.
Okay. So how do monitoring solutions help operation team with correlation, triage, and root cause diagnosis?
So the hardest problem when something is going wrong, you get to know, because you're a SaaS service and your customers are complaining, so you get to know something is broken. The hardest part of that problem is where to go look. What should I be fixing? And that's where monitoring is really, really powerful, right? Where the metrics become very, very super relevant, because now you got multiple, hundreds of microservices supporting a particular SaaS application. In a bird's eye view, you can just say, everything else looks good, but this particular service seems to be having a problem, right? Then you can dive in, you can go to the second level of metrics, and you can say, okay, now I'm going to look at more deeper operational metrics and keep going deeper and deeper and deeper until you can really find out what's wrong with it. So that helps with faster time to mitigate issues, faster time to just bring things back, just remediate and mitigate and just bring things to a healthy state. While you could do the more root causing and fixing things on the back end, So metrics help you kind of like get things to a steady, healthy state much faster.
Okay, just to get deeper, seems like this is a reactive approach to it, but how about some proactive approach to it? Are there ways of sort of monitoring solutions where you are proactive, where you might foresee something happening?
Yeah. So as a fundamental tenet, your organization should be saying anytime a customer alerts us about something and our system did not, minutes or hours ahead of it, we are missing something in our software stack. We're missing some monitoring aspect of our software stack. So that should really be the last resort that customers are actually telling you something is broken. So generally in monitoring system, you've got multiple thresholds and on those metrics, and you alert yourself way ahead of when there could be an impact. So that's how one way you stay proactive and you stay ahead of something bad happening. The things that I've seen gone missing in that approach is, and where customers actually report something, is that you were just not monitoring something because you didn't think it was important. And you just missed it, and then that is the thing that broke, and then you didn't know because none of your metrics were actually telling you that story. Over there, you need to have very strong mechanisms and processes in place so that every time this happens, that a customer contacts you and you didn't know about it from your team wasn't already on it, from your metric stack, there's something missing in your own systems, and you must solve it before the next release ships and so forth. So.
Okay, so obviously this requires a lot of time and cost investment. What do you recommend the approach be, and how much will that cost be for any application deployment?
So depends on how much you care about your application, I guess. These systems are not very expensive, like on-call rotation systems or CloudWatch or any other metrics and monitoring system. They're not super expensive, but they get expensive as your application scales. As your application has more components to it and more monitoring and more metrics need to be published. But in general, they're not I wouldn't call the systems expensive even at a very large scale. So I think that's not the cost. The cost is human. The people who have to jump on it, the people who have to triage those issues, fix them, and there's a real human cost to it, right? If you got all the people in one time zone, someone's going to have to get up in the middle of the night and deal with an angry spouse to go fix a metric that beeped, right? So that's one aspect of the human cost is much higher than any other cost, I think. But the flip side of that is also, that I've had teams where journey teams are very protective of each other, but when you're getting faced in the middle of the night because of somebody else's bad code, and your spouse is yelling at you, then people come and say, hey, this guy is not, or this gal is not pulling their load. So you probably should do something about that. So that goes away. That thin wheel of silence goes away pretty quickly with metrics and monitoring.
So, but in terms of cost and in terms of involvement, is there too much of investment into that? Like too much of KPIs?
No, it's absolutely not. So I think it's the human side, the culture side is much more expensive. The actual dollar cost of setting up these systems and monitoring is generally pretty low.
There's not too much of...
No, you wouldn't even see it in your bill. With all the other infrastructure and compute and CDN costs, this is going to be a drop in the bucket.
Okay. So how do we monitor API endpoints?
API endpoints, my philosophy is canaries. You should, of course, test your APIs and you should have API rollout and management strategy. But canaries is the best way. Every public-facing API should have a bunch of canaries that are continuously testing it. There are a lot of tools that are already available in the market, both provided by cloud providers or third parties that actually test your API endpoints. So you can just point an endpoint, use this tool, and they'll do security testing, they'll do functional testing, they'll do performance testing as well. So canaries are the best way to do it. CloudWatch has this concept of synthetics, where you can actually set up a synthetic stack in another region, and from that region, they're continuously testing your public API endpoints. So I think canaries is the easiest and the fastest and the most painless but very effective way of
monitoring in terms of being operational or in terms of being hacked or something.
All of these things, right? So you can just think about it like you start off with operational. Is it healthy? Is this API still accessible? That's one. just because your internal systems are all saying everything is working doesn't mean people are able to access it from the outside, right? And people might not be able to access it because of things that are completely out of your control. It could be a breakage in a cloud network, or it could be the internet that is broken, or it could be some other ISP that is having a problem, or a home network problem in a certain geography. So I think it could be a multitude of reasons, but you still want to know. So then people contact you, you're able to guide them as to what is the problem, when it's going to be solved. So that's the basic level of API health monitoring. It goes beyond that. I mean, like API health monitoring is then, like I said, functionally, is it providing the value that it's supposed to? Every public-facing API, you should have some security tests running on top of it as well, continuously to see if there's making sure that there's no vulnerability. Of course, when you launch them, you do a security review and whatnot, but even afterwards, you have to continuously audit, and these canaries help you audit if you actually have because of new code change, you introduced a vulnerability that you weren't aware of.
Ali, so difference of opinion is always natural. There are different people and they have different objectives, and they will come up with their own sort of like set of KPIs to put in for the monitoring solution. How would you go about handling this situation?
So people might not even have different objectives. They might have the same objective and the best intentions to achieve that objective, but there are differences of opinion. Different people think about a certain feature or certain aspect to be done differently. It could be a monitoring solution, it could actually be a business feature that you're launching. And I think A/B testing is a very strong and powerful framework to actually establish which opinion is right, because you can keep arguing all day without data. But A/B testing actually allows you to define, which approach is better or not based on actually running both approaches in production and putting customer traffic on it and seeing which one is more liked by your customers. Metrics become very important over there. So designing your A/B test experiment in an unbiased fashion is an important aspect of it. And then using metrics to determine which one was more successful than the other is also very important. And all of that thought has to be put in ahead of time. Even when there are differing opinions for both of those approaches, you need to put the thought ahead of time to be able to reach the right conclusions once the experiment concludes. So metrics do play an important role in, so that you're not just continuously just analyzing, parallelizing, and disagreeing with each other. What I'm talking about is features. So you have a feature that needs to be, you say, I want this to be one page application, whereas another opinion is, no, this should be a workflow with 3 different pages that you have to navigate through. How do you know which one is better for your customer? Which one is easier? Both will have their own pros and cons. I'm saying with an A/B test where maybe 30% of your customers are seeing one workflow and 30% are seeing another one. Now you can have metrics at the back end, business metric as well as operational metrics that tell you how easy was it for them to navigate both of those workflows. How much time did it take to complete both of those workflows, and how much was the drop-off rate in each of those workflows, and then you can decide based on those metrics as to which one was a more successful strategy, rather than 2 people just arguing with each other based on opinions.
Okay, but let's just suppose, can this also be extended to fixing your KPIs for monitoring?
Yeah.
This versus this?
Monitoring systems evolve a lot. There's no such thing as coming up with the perfect metrics on day 0. This is an evolution, and it continues as long as your service is alive. So you start off with something basic, but then you continuously evolve them. What are the ways to evolve them, right? I used to be of the point of view that more metrics is always better, but I've started changing that, because if they've got too many metrics, then you can actually get in this data deluge, and that doesn't help you remediate the issue faster when you actually get an issue. And a lot of them can go into alarm and you don't know which one to go after. So in those kind of places where there's difference of opinion on, what are the most important ones, because you've got a lot of these metrics, and what are the most important ones for us to be paging the team on, then you could actually see, tie them back to, actual events, and which metrics are actually creating the most value in those actual events. It's not as much A/B testing, more it's like production testing of, every time you have an event, you say, did we have the right metrics? Were they giving us enough heads up, enough alarming heads up that we can actually go and fix those things and remediate them or not? So I think you just continuously keep asking yourself with every incident that happens, with every customer contact, with every internal system failure, you always ask yourself, do I have the right metrics in place to alarm the team? And this is a continuous process. It evolves over time.
Okay. Thank you. So there are many monitoring solutions that are out there. So which one are your favorite? Which one would you recommend?
I love them all.
Love them.
I work with many of them.
Okay.
Many of them are our very close partners at AWS as well. So all of them are interesting and unique in their own ways. But yeah, CloudWatch has its own set of monitoring solutions. They've launched real user monitoring. They have A/B testing frameworks as well. Then there's New Relic, Datadog, Kingdom. There's so many of them, and they work very closely with the cloud. And each one of them has very unique and interesting value propositions. So I couldn't pick one. It depends on the use case.
Okay. So how do you keep your system flexible? Because obviously business evolves and your sort of applications also evolve in different directions. How do you make sure that your monitoring system is also flexible to handle all of that?
That's a very good question, because monitoring systems can go out of date, and they can go out of date very quickly because software is moving at a very, very rapid pace. And you're just deploying every day. The continuous deployment system that just, as soon as you click a button, it just deploys all over the world. So when your software is moving at such high velocity, whatever metrics you put in place today are not going to be, when you launch the service, are not going to be good enough a few weeks down the line. So whatever operational readiness reviews that you did when you started the process has to be repeated periodically to see if you still have the right metrics. If you're missing events and you're getting notified by customers, that's another signal that you actually need to go back and audit your monitoring and metric system. But generally, I try to do it ahead of time and put the right mechanism. Every new change that you're bringing to the system, any large change to an existing feature as well, you have a section on metrics in your design review, and you say, how are you going to change the metrics so that they still stay relevant. The same thing happens for continuous deployment systems as well. You think our metrics and testing is really good, but then as the software evolves, it's not good enough anymore. So you need to institute mechanisms as a leader to make sure that you're continuously auditing them and you are improving them along the way as your software evolves.
Okay, so consider me as a startup founder. I am just building my application and sort of like putting it into production. And how do I go about setting up a monitoring system, and which tools are the best ones over there?
Okay, you keep asking me about the best. I'm not going to answer the question. Okay. Ask me again. but depends on the use case. I'll say that again. I would caution against boiling the ocean. As a startup founder, you could really delude yourself in a lot of data thinking it's good for you and your team or the health of your services, and it's not. My recommendation would be to start really small. CPU, I/O, memory, these are good enough places to start, and focus more on the mechanism and the processes of when things break, how do you improve upon them, right? So start off with basic things like that. Or let's say if you're running your application on a Kubernetes cluster, you already know how many times your application crashed and restarted. You could put some basic instrumentation for Linux core dumps and so forth. So just start off with the absolute basics and then evolve from there. Because I've seen a lot of teams and companies really trying to do a lot and boil the ocean and then not going anywhere with it because nobody knows what to do with all of these metrics all at once. And my feedback to new founders would be focus on a few metrics, as few as possible, preferably something that can fit in one single screen, and then focus on your mechanisms and your backend system and your paging and the culture of operational excellence rather than the metrics themselves. Metrics will get better if you have the right culture in place.
So in terms of resources, if somebody has to research, okay, these are my 5 different KPIs that I have to build as a startup, where should they go?
That is really a team decision. I don't think anybody can tell you. So there's some metrics that people could tell you. If you're an e-commerce shop, they can tell you these are the ones, and you can go on the internet and read what other e-commerce stores are doing. Or if you're a ride-hailing app, you could see what other ride-hailing apps are doing. So they could probably come up with a few. But other than that, really, the teams need to sit down and think very deeply about what metrics really matter to them. And sometimes you could have very surprising metrics that you didn't think were important enough, which are really driving the entire innovation of your business or the health of your business and so forth. So this is an investment every team needs to make. You can get some basic metrics, but then the more granular, because every business is unique in terms of the value proposition it's offering in some shape or form. You need to be able to capture that in terms of your operational business and performance metrics, and that nobody else can do but you.
Okay, so consider the case that, so this is one continuum, side of continuum. The other is this is CEO of a huge company, multiple applications, multiple services running. How do they start their process of setting up these monitoring systems?
Yeah, I'd say the same thing again. If you've already built a big thing without this, your challenge is probably not technology, your challenge is culture. And to change this culture is just much better to just start small. Like don't do a big, like 1,000 metrics in 3 weeks, right? Like you could easily, but yeah, instead of that, just few metrics for each of your applications, each of your microservices, and focus more on the culture and the operational excellence and the backend tooling and the pager rotations and getting your team aligned with run books that you have to remediate to system when the metrics go into breach and so forth. I would focus much more on that than actually building a lot of metrics. But the metrics are going to continue evolving and getting better and better. But if you not build the culture and you built a big application already, culture will be your biggest nemesis, not metrics or alarm.
So you're mentioning culture a lot. So let's just suppose you're a VP of engineering and you have to build this system and also the people around it. What are some of your tips there?
Yeah, that from VP of engineering, I'm like, that person is the holder of the faith when it comes to operational excellence. Everything starts and ends with them. So they have to make sure that their team understands the importance of operational excellence, which means the ops roadmap needs to be prioritized above feature roadmaps. The pushback to product and other teams has to go because you have some operational debt that you need to clear. Similarly, your ops meeting should have at least once every week. It must be the most important meeting on your calendar, which never gets rescheduled, it never goes anywhere. So you're the holder of the faith. If you're not taking it seriously, nobody else will take it seriously as well. The VP of engineering should never hire anybody who's not willing to be paged themselves, and he or she should be willing to be paged as well whenever the system is not behaving as expected. And last but not the least, I think the most important part of that culture is recognizing operational excellence. It's very easy to forget this thing that broke at 2 a.m. and when you got up at 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. it was already fixed. It's very easy to forget that somebody actually got up in the middle of the night, got yelled at by their spouses before they actually went and fixed something, right? Recognizing those kind of events very thoughtfully and mindfully and conscientiously is an important aspect. And I've seen teams do it both in terms of the recognition in team forums, but also having awards that are for operational excellence, just like you have, employee of the month type of award, so the ops ninja of the week or of the month awards as well.
Define an ops ninja for us. Like, what would be the ideal? So there's one technical part. The other is obviously the other emotional part, or that. How would you define a good ops ninja?
Ops ninja is, I wouldn't define an ops ninja. It again depends on the team and the service, but an award like this should go to somebody who went over and beyond what the Call of Duty was, right? Like, for example, there was some event that happened, but that person fixed that event, brought the service back to healthy state using run books, but then they found that something was wrong in the run books. They went and fixed the run books as well. When they fixed the run book, they figured out that there could have been a better alarm or a better metric that could have informed us earlier about the health degrading rather than the one we have. Then they went and fixed that as well. And then they went and sort of like in the ops review told the whole team as to what they did and how they got it, not just fixing the problem and just walking away with it, but checking a box, but actually end-to-end closing what the gap was in the first place, right? So those are the kind of people I would say are real ops ninjas in my team. They're the people really that your business and your team really depends on to move the needle, and they need to be recognized accordingly.
So who sets the directive or maybe the direction for setting up these monitoring systems? Does it come from product management teams, or is it like more of a technology team, their own initiatives, and like product managers have to be aware of that, they need to push that?
So if you see throughout this last half an hour that we've been talking, I mean, like I have talked a lot about operational metrics, and I have not talked that much about business metrics, right? So I've talked a lot about operational and performance metrics, and those need to come bottom up. I think they have to come bottom up, and technology and engineering team needs to own that. Product team should ideally just really concern themselves about the business metrics and nothing else. If they're getting in your business and they are telling you what to build to monitor health of your application, your engineering team is messed up. You got to do something about that.
Okay. So, what is the difference between agent-based and agentless monitoring?
So the difference is very easy. I'm like, in one of them, you basically, like I said, CPU, memory, core dumps. You don't need to put anything, any agent to be able to do it. Most of the times, our systems that already exist emit those metrics automatically. There's nothing extra that you have to do. Agent-based monitorings are much deeper. You actually put an agent or you integrate with an SDK that can give you much deeper insights. For example, for application performance monitoring, you can have a passive monitoring system that looks at DOM objects and say, what is the page load time, what's this, what's that, versus you can integrate a small piece of code, and that can actually see how long is it taking, and the second order detail of which part of the TCP connection is taking longer, and so forth. That you can't do just by passively looking at people's connections coming into your application. Similarly, if you go to the operational side, I mean, like if you want to expose some metrics that are not, for example, number of file descriptors what's the number of file descriptors? You've got to have some agent that can actually collect the system state and then emit it as a metric into your metrics backend that you could actually alarm on. So the difference is, I think, how far you want to go with this, but more importantly, how much friction do you have of inserting an agent-based solution versus a agentless solution. I'm a big fan of agentless solutions, but they only get you so far. So there is a point where you have to go with an agent, and over there, then you have to make a decision of which one is the right one for you.
Okay, so you've been in this field for a while. Okay, so maybe you can sort of define for us what is good, bad, and the future look like for this this domain.
Yeah, for me, it's all about culture and it's about people. So the good, bad is both coming from people who have adapted to this new way of shipping software versus people who are still stuck in the previous way of thinking about software. And to me, that is the hardest part of the whole puzzle. It's not the technology. Technology is easy. People is hard. And I see people stuck in that, always ship systems that never break. And I think that philosophy has changed, right? And the way that philosophy has changed is very fundamental, and many people haven't got onto that bandwagon, and they never will. So you need to be careful when you're building a SaaS offering, you're building something which is cloud native, you got to hire the right people who can inculcate the right culture as well. So I think that's the change in philosophy, change in culture that has happened, and that's the one to watch out for. And it's all about people at the end of the day. I think this is going to be the future. This is how it is. Even if nobody is shipping, there are sure. If you're building a router or a switch, you ship it to somebody, they install it in their environment. You have no visibility of how they're using it, right? So sure, there's some hardware you ship to a device, and you don't have that much visibility into what that device is doing at the end of the day. But most applications now do have that visibility of how their product is being used. What is more popular versus what's not? Is it providing the value that they intended, or is it providing less value or no value? And what's the health of this thing? Is it frustrating for people or not? You have to have the courage to actually go look at those metrics and make decisions based on those metrics. So that's what the future is going to be. All successful companies today, as well in the future, will use those metrics and be able to look each other in the eye and say we made a mistake, or our opinion was wrong, and we're going to change it because the data tells us otherwise. And I think those courageous teams are winning today, and they will continue to win in the future as well.
So Ali, thanks a lot for joining us. We really appreciate your time and wisdom, and looking forward to more sessions.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you guys for joining us. Let's meet for another session soon.